So, just want to touch on some of the political institutional issues. This is a summary of what we call the business environment rankings. And what we do in the Economist Intelligence Unit is we take the 82 biggest economies in the world and we rank the quality or attractiveness of their business environments. How do we do this? We've developed a model that addresses 10 categories which investors have told us are the things that they look at when they're trying to make an investment decision. So that looks at the political environment, macroeconomic environment, the size of market opportunities, rate of growth, policies towards foreign investment, towards private enterprise generally, the tax system, financing, the labour market and infrastructure. So look at Brazil. Brazil is number 3 in the Latin America region. The Latin America region is 12 of the economies in the Latin America region. No prizes for guessing which economy comes first, but it's not one of the biggest ones, Chile. And there, although what lessons does a small economy like Chile have for a big economy like Brazil? Well, the main lesson is that you have to start a long time ago if you want to have those reforms working now. In second place is Mexico, actually, although it tends to score quite close to Brazil. Why does it do a bit better than Brazil? You may well ask, because it certainly has a lot of the structural problems that Brazil has and many more, particularly with the crime rate and the oil dependency that it's struggling with at the moment. But of course it has the advantage of proximity to important markets. Even if we know that the US is going to be sluggish and it's not going to be the primary driver of economic growth in the next 10 years, it still is a quarter of world GDP, and Mexico is on the doorstep and very integrated into that. So what makes up, if we look at it then among the 82 countries, Brazil is halfway. It's around 40, middling. And the other thing I would say is to be third in the Latin America region is no great accolade, because the Latin America region and the Middle East region fight it out at the bottom of the global rankings in terms of the quality and attractiveness of their business environments. But where does Brazil do well? It does very well on political stability. It does pretty poorly on political effectiveness. That score being dragged down by legislative inertia that you're all very familiar with. And does pretty well on macroeconomic environment now that we've stabilized in inflation, macroeconomic variables. But that's also, of course, the stabilization of these variables in a country that had a history of hyperinflation was one of the key powerful drivers of improved performance over the past 5 years. And that's great, and you can't take that away from Brazil. Only obviously, you know, I'm preaching to the converted here, but considering that Brazil has stratospheric interest rates that in most countries would induce a severe recession, it is striking that inflationary pressures still remain quite stubborn. One of the areas that Brazil does best on is financing, where it ranks second in the region and it's in the top quarter globally. That's kind of its best score. And I think that's interesting. And it resonates because it's true to say that Brazil has, in absolute terms, obviously the largest financial markets in Latin America. It's much better served than Mexico, which should have much deeper financial markets. For various reasons it hasn't. Small countries like Chile and Panama have developed very sophisticated financial markets for economies of their size. But I think it's interesting to note that although this is one of Brazil's strengths, and the strength of the financial system was definitely something that underpinned its resilience during the global crisis, it is, considering the magnitude of the challenges that Brazil faces over the next 10 years, would argue that this isn't going to be enough, and Brazil still is going to have to attract a lot of capital externally, partly because we have persistently low savings rates. And Brazil does pretty appallingly badly in the labour market and infrastructure and tax categories. In the tax categories, it ranks 74 out of 82 countries. And all of you are more familiar than me with the details of why that is, but we can come on to that. But also the labour market and infrastructure. Can I just have a show of hands? How many people here have been to China? Okay, so quite a few. That is a place where you, as those of you who have been know, you go to China, you go to Shanghai, Beijing, even some of the provincial cities that would be, the equivalent of a small town in Brazil. it makes you cry when you come back to Latin America, the quality of the infrastructure in China. Yes, there is this concern that there is an investment excess in China that could end in bust, but when it's over, they're going to have some fantastic infrastructure in those cities, and it means that they're going to avoid some of the traumatic costs of the rapid expansion of cities that you saw in Latin America in the 50s and 60s, and we're still suffering today, the fact that the cities grew far too dramatically quickly for the pace of the infrastructure. And I love coming to Latin America, but I always get really depressed when I arrive at Guarulhos, because it takes forever. Not only does it take forever, but it's like, this is the most important economy in Latin America, one of the most important economies in the emerging world. Why does it have to be such an inefficient, scruffy airport to welcome? I mean, people say to me, well, when you go to the US, it's not as if that's a pleasant experience. It's true. I mean, going through Miami isn't that enjoyable, but the US don't really want people to come. Presumably Brazil and the rest of Latin America do. And also then the taxi journey from Guarulhos into the center, it's those roads again. How can the most important city in Latin America have these potholed, bumpy, curvy roads anyway, that's something that that is a kind of investment that it amazes me that isn't more of a popular demand in a way to address this. So essentially the point about these rankings is that Brazil's absolute score out of 10 being the best, 1 being poor. So it's actually improving, because we're seeing some little incremental improvements in a few categories. But the fact is they're incremental and not enough, so it actually slips slightly in the rankings. And this, in the past, when other economies before their financial systems totally imploded, the pace of improvement in other economies was so much more rapid than in Brazil, that Brazil could stand still and actually fall down in the rankings. The only reason why it's staying stable in the rankings is that, as we know, a lot of regions are in a total mess at the moment around the world. So let's talk a bit about, we've talked a little bit about the incrementalism of reforms in the past. Now what I want to talk about is what's possible and what could be addressed. So the paper addresses in particular some specific areas that are familiar and long-standing for you all, in terms of the slow pace of bureaucracy and procedures in various areas. So we're talking not only in the legislative area. Okay, Brazil is a complicated country to run. It has a proliferation of small parties. It means that no government ever gets in with a majority. It's always a real process to try and forge support in Congress. But that is a reason why political reform needs to be very much on the agenda. And in all of these cases, it really is a question about hoping that the political leadership, and we know that politicians per se around the world don't tend to be long-term thinking creatures, they tend to be thinking about their next term. But I think really that there needs to be a sort of, if there were more of a vision for why this is important, I think more support could be garnered to address some of these issues. And it's a question, as Luis Felipe was saying, is of thinking about the next generation. And most people are going to be interested in thinking about the futures of their children.